A broken Apache woman finds unexpected safety in a stranger's cabin, and the rancher who shelters her discovers a purpose he didn't know he needed. Their fragile bond grows as danger closes in. If you want more Wild West emotional stories, subscribe and tell me, where are you from? She collapsed at the edge of his land like a fading shadow, her breathing shallow and strained, every step behind her carrying the weight of a humiliation too deep to speak aloud. The rancher had seen cruelty before. This was the Wild West after all, but nothing prepared him for the brokenness in her eyes. The Apache woman tried to straighten her posture as if shame alone held her upright. But the moment he stepped toward her, her strength gave out completely. He caught her before she hit the ground, her trembling hands gripping his shirt as though she feared the earth itself would swallow her. He guided her carefully toward his cabin, glancing over his shoulder at the empty plains. The sun had dipped low, staining the sky with streaks of amber and violet, but danger still crawled in the shadows. If the men who had humiliated her were nearby, they would not hesitate to punish him for helping her. Still, he tightened his hold around her shoulders, feeling the cold bite of her skin through her torn dress. The Apache tribes and settler ranchers had never been friends, yet in her fragile state, he saw no enemy, only a human being seeking refuge. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire flickered against the log walls, casting gentle light across her battered face. She stood near the door hesitantly, as if unsure she deserved the safety offered to her. The rancher motioned her closer, pulling out a chair and setting a blanket across it. Her fingers shook as she sat, gripping the wooden edges like she expected the world to collapse without warning. He noticed dried blood at the corner of her lip, bruises spreading along her jawline, and a silent fury grew inside him. Someone had treated her like prey. He heated water in a tin cup, handing it to her slowly so she wouldn't flinch. She raised it to her lips, but before drinking, she paused, watching him as though waiting for permission. "You're safe," he said gently, his voice softer than he expected. She stared at him for several seconds, searching for any hint of deceit. When she found none, she took a desperate sip, then another, until the cup was empty. The rancher kept his eyes on the fire, giving her the dignity of not being watched while she regained herself. When the warmth began to reach her bones, she relaxed slightly, though her shoulders still twitched at sudden sounds. The rancher set a small loaf of bread in front of her, but she hesitated. "I don't want trouble for you," she whispered, her voice thin. He shook his head firmly. "The trouble already exists," he murmured. "Your pain didn't start here. I'm just trying to stop it from getting worse." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she broke a small piece of the bread and ate it slowly, savoring each bite like it was the first food she had tasted in days. She began to speak in fragmented sentences, each one revealing just enough to paint a clearer picture of the cruelty she had endured. A group of outlaws had raided the outskirts of her band's land, capturing her when she tried to flee. They mocked her heritage, her strength, her very existence. She fought back, but they were too many. She escaped only when they grew careless, leaving her beaten but determined to survive. Her voice steadied as she spoke, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The rancher listened silently, understanding that sometimes the act of telling the story was harder than the memory itself. When she finished, she looked away, clearly expecting judgment or maybe disgust. Instead, the rancher took a slow breath, fighting the tightness in his chest. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said. His words were simple, but in the quiet cabin, they carried weight. She blinked rapidly, as if those 7 words meant more than any reassurance she had ever received. Her throat tightened and she whispered, "Why help me? I'm not one of your people." The rancher stood, pacing near the fire as he gathered his thoughts. "Because humanity ain't about sides," he replied. "Not tonight, not with what you've been through." The fire crackled softly as the silence stretched between them, But it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a shared pause, an acknowledgement of pain and the unexpected refuge she had found. The rancher finally grabbed a clean cloth and dipped it into warm water, gesturing for her to let him tend to her wounds. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of guilt, as if she didn't deserve kindness. Eventually, she nodded and allowed him to gently wipe away the dirt and dried blood. His touch remained careful, respectful, never lingering longer than necessary. Each time she flinched, he moved slower, whispering reassurance until she relaxed again. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, brushing against the cabin walls like wandering spirits. She glanced toward the window nervously, but the rancher placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "No one's coming for you tonight," he said. "Not while you're under my roof." She believed him, not because of his strength, but because of the sincerity in his voice. For the first time since her humiliation, she felt the faint spark of safety stirring within her chest. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, leaning slightly closer to the fire, letting warmth chase away the cold memories clinging to her skin. Hours passed quietly. The rancher brewed herbal tea, something his grandmother had taught him for calming frayed nerves. When he handed it to her, she accepted it with grateful eyes. Her breathing slowed, becoming less erratic. She watched him as he moved around the cabin, tending to mundane tasks, yet every action he took seemed meaningful, like he was rebuilding a piece of the world she thought she had lost. She wondered if he understood how deeply his simple kindness touched her shattered spirit. As the night deepened, the rancher rolled out an extra bedroll near the fire, motioning for her to rest. She hesitated again, the weight of distrust still heavy in her. "I won't touch you," he said quietly. "You control your space. I'll sit right here." He dragged a chair beside the door and leaned back, his rifle resting across his knees, not pointed at her, but ready to defend her. That gesture alone nearly brought her to tears. She lowered herself onto the bedroll, every sore muscle sighing in relief. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Thank you." The words were fragile, trembling with emotion. The rancher didn't turn around. He simply nodded, though she could see the curve of compassion in his profile. She curled into the blanket, the warmth of the fire slowly melting the ache inside her chest. For the first time since her ordeal, she drifted towards sleep, without fear grasping her throat. The last thought she held was a quiet realization. She had stumbled into a stranger's land, but somehow she had found the one place in the Wild West where her broken spirit could rest. The cabin felt small beneath the weight of her trembling breaths, the shadows on the walls shifting with every flicker of the fire. She clutched the blanket tighter, as if holding herself together was the only way to stop her heart from breaking. The rancher kept his distance, sensing how fragile she was, how every sudden move made her flinch like an animal hunted too long. Snow began to fall beyond the window, soft but relentless, sealing them in a cocoon of cold silence. The rancher didn't mind. The storm meant no one would reach them quickly, giving her a chance to finally feel safe. She tried to speak, but her voice quivered, caught between fear and exhaustion. The rancher leaned closer, but not too close, letting her know she didn't need to explain anything until she was ready. Her breath hitched, her eyes darting toward the windows as the wind rattled the boards. "They're not coming," he said quietly, turning the rifle just enough to reassure her without threatening her. "If they were anywhere near, my horse would have warned us." She swallowed hard, her shoulders loosening slightly. Trust came slowly for someone who had been broken, but a small part of her finally began to believe him. She shifted closer to the fire, hoping the warmth could melt the cold lodged deep inside her bones. Her hands were scraped raw, her arms bruised, in patterns that spoke of violence she didn't yet dare describe. The rancher watched her without staring, careful to offer space while still being present. He forced a calm he didn't fully feel, because seeing her like this stirred something fierce inside him. a protective instinct sharpened by witnessing too much cruelty in the Wild West. He wondered how long she had been running, how far she had traveled just to escape the men who had humiliated her. She took a shaky breath. I thought they would kill me," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. The rancher's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface. He lowered himself onto the floor near her, but kept a respectful distance, resting his back against the edge of the hearth. "You survived," he said gently. "That took strength, more than most folks have." She looked at him in disbelief, as if no one had ever acknowledged her resilience before. Her eyes filled with tears again, not of fear this time, but of the fragile relief that came from finally being seen. The wind howled again, and she startled, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The rancher didn't move toward her. Instead, he stood and checked the lock on the door, making sure she could hear the solid click of the latch. "No one's coming through that door but me," he said firmly. She watched him, her gaze lingering on the tired strength in his posture, the steadiness of his hands. For the first time since entering his cabin, her breathing began to slow. She had learned the look of a dangerous man long ago. This rancher didn't have it. His strength didn't threaten, it sheltered. He returned to sit a few feet away from her, one knee bent, one hand resting on the floorboards. "If you're cold, I can add more wood to the fire," he offered. She shook her head, but he noticed the way her teeth gently chattered. He added another log anyway, not speaking as sparks lifted into the chimney. The sudden glow brightened the room, casting warm light across her face, highlighting the dried trails of tears on her cheeks. She touched one cheek self-consciously, brushing her fingers over a bruise as though surprised it still existed. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. "Your people, my people. It's not safe for either of us." He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sometimes the world decides your enemies for you," he said, "but I don't see one sitting in my cabin right now." She blinked, stunned by his sincerity. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not as a threat, not as a pity case, not as a symbol of an enemy tribe, just as a woman who'd been hurt. She lowered her gaze, tears slipping silently onto the blanket, her shoulders shaking. She didn't sob loudly. The pain was too old, too deep. But the rancher felt each silent tear like a knife. He didn't touch her, didn't try to quiet her. Instead, he tended to the fire, keeping the room warm while she released everything she had held back. Outside, the storm grew harsher, snow piling against the windows, wind roaring through the trees. But inside the cabin, the crackling flames softened the air, giving her permission to fall apart without judgment. After a long while, she whispered, "I don't know why I came here. My feet just kept moving. I didn't even know where I was going." He nodded. Her eyes met his again. Sometimes the body knows where to find safety before the mind does. That faint spark of trust he had seen earlier, a small flame growing stronger in the shelter of his presence. She studied him carefully, as if trying to understand why he would risk helping her. The rancher broke eye contact first, partly because he didn't want her to feel cornered, partly because the weight of her gaze stirred something he wasn't ready to name. He rose to his feet and retrieved a small leather pouch from a shelf. Inside were herbs and bandages, the remnants of old injuries he'd learned to treat on his own. "If you let me," he said gently, "I can clean your wounds." She hesitated, pulling the blanket tighter, but slowly extended one bruised arm toward him. He approached with slow, deliberate movements, making sure she saw every motion. When he touched her arm, she inhaled sharply, but he murmured, "Easy, I won't hurt you." His hands were warm, careful as he dabbed the cuts with water and herbs. He treated each wound with reverence, as if honoring the strength it took for her to endure them. She watched him, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Every gentle touch rewrote a small part of her fear, replacing it with something quieter, something almost like hope. When he finished, she whispered, "Why are you so kind?" The question broke him a little. He stared at the floor before answering. "Because no one deserves to be alone in their pain," he said. "And because if it had been me out there, beaten, scared, I'd hope someone would do the same." She looked at him the way someone looks at dawn after a long night, caught between disbelief and relief. Her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, grounding herself as she processed the truth of his words. The storm eventually softened, though the night remained cold. The rancher prepared another cup of warm tea, setting it beside her before stepping back. She sipped it slowly, her voice steadier when she finally spoke again. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. He nodded. "You don't have to decide tonight. Rest first. Heal. The world can wait." Beneath the blanket, her legs folded beneath her, and she sank deeper into the warmth of the fire. She wasn't healed, not even close, but she wasn't running anymore. Not tonight. The rancher took his place near the door again, rifle across his lap, not as a threat, but as a promise. He would keep watch. He would protect her. She lay down slowly, her eyes fluttering shut. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered something so soft he almost missed it. "Thank you for not seeing me as a burden." His chest tightened, and he stared into the fire, letting the warmth hide the ache in his expression. "You're not," he murmured. "You're just someone who deserves peace." And for the first time since her humiliation, she drifted into sleep, wrapped not in fear, but in the safety of a stranger who had chosen kindness over casting pale gold light across the room. She sat near the fire, her knees drawn close, the blanket pooled around her like a fragile shield. Her wounds were still tender, but no longer screaming with pain. She watched the rancher move about the cabin, preparing breakfast in his quiet, steady way. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Why are you helping me?" The question had lingered inside her chest all night. She needed to understand. He paused, jaw tightening, eyes lowering as though choosing the right words took effort. When he finally turned toward her, he held out a piece of warm bread. She accepted it hesitantly, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. His voice was low when he answered, "Because no one deserves what they did to you." The simplicity of his statement struck her harder than any elaborate explanation. It wasn't pity, not the hollow kind she had learned to fear. It was conviction, raw and honest. Her heart trembled, not in fear this time, but in the dizzying unfamiliarity of being defended without expecting something in return. She nibbled at the bread, savoring the warmth that spread through her body. Outside, the plains stretched into a pale horizon, untouched by the violence of the night before. Yet she knew cruelty still lurked somewhere. Outside of there, she wrapped the blanket tighter, her mind battling between the instinct to flee and the desperate need to rest. The rancher returned to tending the fire, his movements steady, almost soothing. He wasn't trying to impress her or fill the silence with meaningless words. His quiet presence alone was enough to ease the tension coiled inside her chest. The minutes settled comfortably between them. She watched him stoke the fire with practiced ease, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the growing morning light. His strength didn't intimidate her, it reassured her. It felt strange to trust a man again, especially after everything she had endured. She studied him subtly, noting the slight scruff on his jaw, the scars on his forearms, the calm steadiness of a man who had survived his own share of pain. He didn't realize it, but his gentleness was slowly rekindling something inside her, something she feared had died long ago. She swallowed the last bite of her bread and cleared her throat. "If they come back for me—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Her voice splintered. The rancher stopped what he was doing and stood to face her fully. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no flicker of doubt. "They won't touch you," he said. His tone was firm but not harsh. "Not while I'm breathing." The promise was so direct, so absolute, that it made her breath catch. Good a man had sworn to protect her before, but that man had betrayed her trust. Yet somehow, this stranger felt safer than anyone she had ever known. She tried to look away, but he took a single step closer, stopping several feet from her so she wouldn't feel cornered. "You're not a burden," he added quietly. "You're not trouble. You're someone who survived something terrible. Let me help you carry the weight a while." Her vision blurred as emotion
She turned her
pricked at
face
the back
slightly,
of her eyes, ashamed to let him see her cry again, but he didn't rush toward her. He simply knelt beside the fire and handed her another warm cloth so she could wipe her tears with dignity. As the sun climbed higher, coloring the sky in soft oranges, she shifted to sit a little straighter. Her body still ached, but the crippling fear had softened to a dull throb. She watched the rancher pour water into a metal basin. "We should clean those wounds again," he said. "Infection can be just as dangerous as any outlaw." She nodded, grateful but self-conscious. When he approached, she extended her arms, trusting him more now than she would have thought possible the night before. His hands were slow and respectful, never lingering. Still, every gentle touch revived the fragile hope growing inside her. He glanced up occasionally, checking her expression. "Does it hurt?" he asked each time she winced. "Not like before," she whispered. "Not anymore." When he finished tending to her injuries, she felt lighter. Not healed, but not broken either. She watched him pack away the supplies, his movements methodical, almost tender in their own silent way. She wondered who had taught him to be so gentle. Life on the frontier rarely gave men the chance to be soft, yet he was. Not weak, soft in the way that required strength. For a long moment she stared at the cabin walls. The wooden planks smelled faintly of pine. The fire crackled. It felt safe here, safer than anywhere she had been in years. The rancher caught her staring. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't remember the last time someone treated me like a human being." He inhaled slowly, pain flashing briefly across his features, not because of her words, but because he hated that they were true. He moved a little closer, sitting on the opposite side of the fire from her so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. "You deserve better," he said firmly. She closed her eyes, letting his words sink into the cracks inside her. When she opened them again, she found him watching her, not with hunger, not with pity, but with quiet earnestness. She lifted her chin. "What happens now?" He rubbed his thumb along the handle of his rifle, thinking, "You stay here until you're strong again. After that, you decide. I won't push you out, and I won't keep you here against your will." She studied his face. He meant it. Every word. That kind of freedom felt unfamiliar, but liberating. Hours passed as they worked in silence. He chopped firewood while she folded blankets and swept the cabin floor as best as her healing body allowed. He tried to stop her, telling her she needed rest, but she insisted. "I need to feel useful," she said softly. He respected that. The sun climbed higher, warming the cabin and brightening the air between them. Their movements fell into a rhythm, hers careful, his steady, until the space felt shared, not borrowed. She caught him watching her once, his gaze soft but quickly turned away. He wasn't a man who intruded on others' boundaries. By midday, she stepped outside for the first time. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of juniper and damp earth. She breathed deeply, letting the cold fill her lungs. For a moment, the world felt wide again instead of suffocating. The rancher stood a few steps behind her, giving her space, but staying close enough to offer protection. She glanced back at him. "I feel different today," she admitted. "Not whole, but not broken." He gave a small nod, his expression gentle. "That's what healing looks like. Slow, but steady. She walked a little farther, her steps cautious but growing more confident. When she reached the fence line, she placed her hands on the wood and looked out across the open plains. It felt like the first breath after drowning. She turned to him, her voice stronger than before. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost." He tilted his head slightly. "What's that?" She answered softly. "A reason to believe people can still be good." The rancher swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. He stepped closer, still keeping respectful distance, and said, "I don't know what the world will throw at us next, but while you're here, you won't face anything alone." She held his gaze, the warmth of his promise sinking into her heart like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in years, she felt the stir of a future she could choose, not one forced upon her by violence or fear. Standing there beneath the rising morning light, the 30-year-old Apache woman and the 35-year-old rancher found something neither had expected. She found safety. He found purpose. And in that fragile moment of shared trust, their lives quietly began to intertwine, two wounded souls healing side by side, in a world that rarely offered second chances.